Take. I'm your host, AJ Kierstead. NewEnglandTake.com to get more from the show, and that is a Substack. So if you would like these episodes in your inbox, as well as our weekly New England news roundup, please be sure to sign up over there. Big thank you to WKXL Concord and Manchester for picking up the show every Saturday, 8:30 a.m., and GraniteGrock.com for picking up the show Saturday nights. Excited to have a first-time guest on the show today. I happened upon his YouTube channel that showed up in a couple feeds, and thought, hey, let's reach out and see if we can set something up. So I have Carter Hammond of the YouTube channel Locally Sourced. Welcome to the program.
How's it going, AJ? Thanks for having me.
So I prepped him ahead of time. I was going to have a snarky intro to what his show is, but I consider this the evil alternate reality version of my program, coming from the snow-covered Monadnock region, just pushing leftist propaganda on the unwashed masses, as opposed to my libertarian propaganda I tend to push here. I thought it'd be good to have a little back and forth in the nature of what your program is versus mine, and the sort of guests you've been having on recently, because you've actually had some great guests on in the Democratic circles that I'd like to dive into a bit. But how would you describe what you do on your program?
Yeah, so I mean, I started the channel back in like 2019, and it was mostly just a reaction to seeing just sort of the broad capture of local news media from corporate interests. And I prefer independent journalism, or at the very least, people that are willing to like explore alternate options. And I noticed that there was also just a huge void of that presence on spaces like YouTube, or just in general, it wasn't really showing up in social media. So I felt like, I studied video and sound in college. I thought, hey, this is an opportunity to try and take some of that and put it into a space that would allow people to access information, do it that way. So, that was how the channel started. Gradually, I just kind of began talking to people on the left. I think that, generally speaking, I think New Hampshire, as much as people like to think it's a blue state, New Hampshire's pretty red. And I just wanted to try and give like an alternate voice for people on the left broadly, and not even necessarily people on the left. It's not like I'm, specifically hyper partisan with my content. I'm happy to have people on, mostly about just trying to get information out there. So that was the original trajectory that I had for the channel. It's not my day job. I make no money doing it. So it's because it's a labor of love and passion. I think I had to take some time off, and just sort of regroup with the rest of my life, and decided to sort of reapproach the channel this past year, come at it in a more measured way so that I wasn't burning myself out doing it. And so that's sort of how we got to where we are now. And that's the general approach.
It was kind of funny. I was having a conversation a few weeks ago with someone, and I just talked about what I was doing on the show from my perspective, and this person asked, well, who's doing what you're doing on the other side of the aisle? And I was like, I really don't know of very many people, at least that are consistent. Like, there's always these, especially in the podcasting world, it's kind of the nature of what your program is. A lot of people consider a podcast. There's like little bits and starts, and people do it for a little while, and then it goes away. Like, you'll have this great program that gives another side of the aisle. It seems like there isn't a whole lot of the independent media on the left at the kind of regional level really out there. Like, I could think of a bunch of different bloggers and podcasters and stuff on the right, the libertarian side of the house especially, but not so much on the left.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And I think that was the real motivation behind doing this is, like, generally speaking, I try to look at, areas where there's a void of something and then try and just go in and fill that void. And, I think people on the left really love to focus on sort of the national conversation, and it tends to get lost to focus on the local side of stuff, which, if anybody that knows anything about politics should probably understand that it starts right in your town. It starts right where you are, and you have to really engage with it going all the way up the chain. It's not something that you can just like only pay attention to those national races and be keyed into. And I think another aspect of it too is like, look, I'm equal opportunity hater. You know what I mean? I will, I will go after Democrats and conservatives alike. I really, honestly, kind of can't stand the Democratic Party in the state of New Hampshire, and so I think there's a lot of content that I do that's really directed at them because it's one thing for me to be critical of conservatives, but that's not my audience, and it doesn't push the needle at all. There's a lot of discussion going on these days about whether or not you should operate in a third party or you should engage in entryism or whatever, and I'm sort of part of that latter camp where I just, as much as I love the idea of us being in a more parliamentary type system, I think at the moment the political reality of being able to generate a third party that can actually get motion is sort of just not realistic. So if that's the case, then from my perspective, it's a lot easier for me and, anybody that I speak with to push the Democratic Party in the direction that we want it to go in, as opposed to trying to create some separate party that would operate in the same way. So I think that's sort of the idea there. And then it's, again, it doesn't even matter. And there's a lot of podcasts that you'll see that still toe that Democratic Party line. And, it's very consolidated, sort of inbred in the way that they deal with things. And I'm not a fan of it. So I like to approach things from just a more down to earth, critical level. I really try to make sure that I'm looking at as many alternate sources as possible so that the takes that I come in with are balanced. I'm a union member, so a lot of where I come from is based out of just the labor movement and just the better interests of working class people. I think that's really where it comes from, is being mindful of folks that don't have a lot of power and making sure that they get advocated for in that media space.
Political theory question. I don't know if I've talked about this off the side, but I don't know if I've ever brought this up to someone on the left with on the program specifically. I mean, do you think part of the focus on the federal government and the national media and federal issues being a tremendous focus of the Democratic Party is the reason why they've been so successful on the statewide elections, and that's kind of the solution that many on the left see, is everything has to come down from the federal government as opposed to the state level? Or is that totally wrong?
I mean, I don't know. Look, it might be a factor, right? But I think something that people everywhere get wrong, or maybe not, I don't want to say wrong because I don't want people to get all up in their feelings about it. But there's always a lot of factors that go into things, right? And I think we live in a society now where everybody's so captured by the shiny keys that are dangling in front of them all the time. And it's sort of incumbent upon us to consider alternatives, consider other variables that enter into that process that can affect things. So I think it's very easy to be attentive to the national conversation because that's what corporate media is shoving in your face all day. And I think because of that, you get the downstream effect of everybody thinking that national federal politics is where we need to focus. And it just doesn't work like that. As much as people can live in their fantasy land that's the case, it simply doesn't operate that way. And you have to broaden your scope. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to change your perspective on things. But, I used this analogy recently. You got to go from 1080p to 4K on it. And you got to really look at the granularity of the situation.
Yeah, there's a lot of pragmatism that is definitely missing from modern political discourse that leads to a lot of the crazy reactions you see online. We had time later, maybe we'll talk a bit about the whole ICE situation, but that's like a prime example when you're looking at rhetoric, where it's totally us versus them, and everyone needs to toe the same line, or is assumed you're going to toe the same line as everyone else, when that's not how you have fixes to anything. You got to kind of figure out both sides to be able, where they're coming from and everything of that nature, if you want to have a solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think some, you know, right now, if you're ever online, or for the more chronically online folks, you're probably aware that we're living in clip culture now. That's sort of the new meta that everybody operates on, where it's everything's cut down into these bite-sized chunks where you're looking at like a maximum of 3 minutes of people talking about an issue. And that sort of gnat brain attention span problem is really destroying people's ability to think in a long form. And so I think that's detrimental to us as well. And that's part of the reason why on my channel, I like to take the time to do hour-long plus interviews where there's no time constraint that holds people to a certain limit. And then they're not getting into just a rhetorical pitfall, because the sloganeering is a huge issue for me. I think people rely way too much on language that comes down from the top, and everybody's used to their chants and their, their slogans. And I think that's unhelpful, because it truncates so much information that's important in understanding what's going on. I think a great example of this is like, I really can't stand the phrase defund the police, because so much of that concept is just completely left on the cutting room floor when you try and take it to the masses. And then people, for whatever value or lack of value that notion has, it gets completely ignored by most folks, and they don't engage with it. And I think, to sort of follow that on, it's like, look, I don't know a single leftist that doesn't want criminals apprehended and put in jail. You know what
exactly.
I'm saying? Like, it's a wild, and that's how you get to this point where everybody starts making accusations that have absolutely no basis in reality. And so that's sort of where that critique comes from, is I think people in general, it doesn't really matter what your political persuasion is. You need to be critical of the way that information is passed around and disseminated.
Yeah, I love the example of ACAB, because there's so many on the right that do not, especially talking federal law enforcement, they totally they think the feds are these evil Ruby Ridge terrorists that are doing so much. And we see this so much right now with the ICE situation. Once again, it's the ICE situation. I know I really hate bringing it up as just as a contextual example instead of actually talking about the issue at hand, but it's a prime example of the situation where the libertarians have had enough, and they're beginning to actually speak out, especially with what just happened with the Peretti shooting that happened this past Saturday, where they're going like, guys, we don't like the damn feds. We want our border enforcement and things of that nature, but this ain't going the way we want. But things are so polarized that so many people on the left are just roping everyone in because they voted for Trump out of a pragmatic reason, that they're just alienating people as opposed to making change.
Yeah, and look, as I certainly monitor conservative sources, and I've seen the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire's posts on Twitter, and
that's a different thing. We're not talking about LPNH.
To put it mildly, it seems like there's some cognitive dissonance going on there, and you know what? That's not my battle. You know what I'm saying? You guys can have that one. We'll sit it out. Look, as far as ICE goes, like, personally, I'm more of the idea, like the notion that we should be more considerate of sort of returning to a pre-Patriot Act formulation of customs, and that local police should be the ones that are directly handling any type of arresting or dealing with the public. I think that's the best vehicle. I'd like to see the idea of customs and immigration being more like paper pushers, where they're going directly to prisons and dealing with, if you have an illegal immigrant that committed a felony that warrants not being a part of society, then yeah, that person should be handled appropriately. And if deporting them is the correct method to do so, as adjudicated by courts, then that's the way it should be handled. But, I think, and I hope that libertarians can agree with this, we don't need another department added to the table. I keep, as for what it's worth, I keep seeing the Trump administration add more and more departments. And I got to ask the libertarians, like, hey, is this the small government you wanted? Because as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't really meet the metal on it. And, it's like, if you're going to expand the government anyways, I'd much rather see it do something that actually addresses the needs of American citizens that are, without health insurance. They're paying insane amounts on groceries. You got a federal minimum wage, which there are still businesses that honor that $7.25. And ain't nobody paying rent with $7.25 an hour. That's just not a reality that we live in. And I would much prefer to see, if you're going to add anything to the government, it should be providing a material return to the citizens of the country. If government is to do anything at all, it should be to serve us directly.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in a perfect world. In a perfect world where state governments aren't a total nightmare like we see in New York, California, Minnesota, and things of that nature. I 100% agree on the concept totally of local law enforcement should be the red flag raiser to say, nope, this guy's got to go. Report to INS or whatever the agency is. Especially, I think we've just gone down such a terrible route the last 2.5 decades coming out of a Patriot Act is the prime. 9/11 is the thing. So I'm 38, almost 39. You're in your 30s, early 30s.
Yeah, mid 30s. I'm gonna be 37 this year. So
okay. So we're
right
age.
In the pocket.
So our whole world was just set up. It's like a World War II style movement where it just totally reset the whole nature of the political classes and the way we look at politics and the fallout that happened from 8 years of whatever the hell happened during the Obama years, which is, we're not going to relitigate that right now, but it's one of those things, like, there's the reason why we ended up with Trump is because things were so bad for so many years and things get so screwed up and gummed up instead of actually fixing anything. That, yeah, now we got this strong man that people were either given the option between the strongman, orange yelling guy who says funny things online sometimes, or Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, who were just suits of the establishment Democratic Party. And it's not a good solution. Like, there has been no good solution when it came down to the actual presidential ticket, in my opinion, for decades.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think there are a lot of people on the left that looked at it and said, you know what, like, this is a uniparty, and it has been in many ways, as far as we're concerned, since Clinton, right? Yeah. Like, that was a moment at which we saw the Democrats basically completely capitulate to a huge swath of the conservative platform. And at that moment in time, it really codified this sense of there's just things that we're gonna take and we're gonna run with. And look, that ran through Obama, that ran through Biden. There's a lot of smoke that I have for the Democrats in their administrations over our lifetimes. So it's, like I said, equal opportunity hater on that. It's a problem for us. And I think that's why you see a pretty notable swing for a lot of people to the left. If you're looking at actual polling and stuff like that, like, there is a damn good reason. I know I'm saying this on a radio show, so you might have to bleep me, but there's a really good reason why the Democrats' polling is so low with their own constituents, yeah. Right? It's not even about... It's not a dichotomy. It's not a black and white spectrum where all of a sudden, you've got all these people that suddenly don't like the Democrats, so they must become Republican inherently. It's like, what that
which is totally wrong. Totally wrong way to approach it. Right. To say I'm switching parties. Like, I'm not, like, it'd be silly for me to turn and say, I'm going to vote Democrat now because I don't like what the Republicans are doing. Like, I don't agree with their policies. Like, why would you do that? It's
yeah, and what I think it really...
policy's not culture. Like, that's the thing. It's like, I feel like
exactly.
It's you vote for someone based on the policies and political dealings that they're going to make, not necessarily that you agree with them on the culture war or some other nonsense.
Yeah, and honestly, when it comes to that cultural stuff, a lot of times my feeling is like, look, the government should not be an entity dictates culture to us. We have media for that. You know what I mean? We are able to create our own cultural norms for that. I'm much more interested in people just having basic freedoms and access to advancements in technology, right? We have the ability to provide abortions for people to keep them safe if they have something like an ectopic pregnancy. There's a lot of biological situations where in order to protect the life of the mother, you need to be able to provide an abortion. And I think in that scenario, we can't be banning it because we're going to end up killing women. That is a logical conclusion of that. It's something that we can have safely in our society these days, and it should be something that's provided to us. And that's something that's between you and your doctor. There is no place for the government, whether state or federal, to be coming into that space and getting in between you and your doctor. It's just not right.
Yeah, and specific on that, I've probably annoyed a lot of people on my own side of the aisle because I think New Hampshire is the best abortion meet in the middle policy imaginable. Like I don't think it gets too much better because you do need to have that level of compromise and be able to say, hey, these guys have a serious issue with this or that. We need to actually find a way to make it work. And having first 2 trimesters is pretty extreme, especially when you look at globally how that policy is set in other places.
Right. And it's not really like, I don't necessarily want to dive down the abortion rabbit hole here because it's like, we pull an issue out of the hat and we could probably talk about it for an hour and a half at least. But it's just a simple example. You know what I mean? Realistically, to get back to your question about ICE though, I mean, it's just, look, if you go and look at a dictionary, right? If you look at the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of what fascism is, that fits the bill. Now, I do not care what political party that comes from. When you've got a private military force that's masking their faces, going around doing extrajudicial killings in the streets, that's a problem. And it doesn't really matter to me where you sit on the political spectrum. The question I have to ask at that point is like, is this really the country you want to live in? Is that a situation where you could have a conservative person that just gets into some sort of misunderstanding with an ICE officer and all of a sudden they're the one taking the bullet? So the question then becomes, at what point do we say enough is enough and we don't do this anymore? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a lot of people see it as the bitter pill of the chaos was necessary to have happen for us to get to this point. We've reached the breaking point. Like there's no way around it. These last couple of weeks, what's happened in Minnesota, the fact that ICE has not and the rest of the federal government have done nothing to try and resolve the tension between the state government, the activists on the street, everything of that nature. This could have been addressed, but instead they just said, no, we're going to one up. And of course, when everyone keeps one-upping, the likelihood of more tragic mistakes or bad actors is going to happen. I'm very upset to see the shooting of what happened with Peretti. He was disarmed and he was shot in the ground. Like whether or not he was supposed to be there, whether he acted appropriately or not, but the level of errors that got to that point is weeks in the making, is months in the making. It's not something that just happened right now. This is something that needs a level set from the administration to not look like a fascist to probably 2/3 of the country at this point, whether or not they on paper are fascist. You are coming across fascist to enough people where you're going to have a serious problem. If you want to just be cold-hearted, look at the nature of politics and elections, it's going to go bad. It's going to be really bad for the Republicans if they continue this, especially leading up to the midterms.
Yeah, I completely agree. And look, I mean, I really think, years in the making. I think this is decades in the making. You know what I mean? From my perspective, Trump is just the logical conclusion of this broader neoliberal order that we've had for the past several decades. I think it only makes sense that this is exactly where we would end up. And that's a product of both Democratic and Republican administrations spread out over time using multiple different touchstone incidents in our culture as reasons, motivations to produce this outcome. And, you know, if you wind the clock back and you think about the actual election, Trump ran to the left of Kamala Harris when it came to interventions. And I mean, I think looking at some of the things that have gone down since then, we can absolutely question the the promise that he had made to folks on that particular issue. But it was Kamala Harris that was saying we're going to have the strongest military in the world, you know. And I've never been someone that believes that we should be the global police force. At what point does that help anybody in the country?
I think populism is a cancer on politics, period, because it drives people to just change how they go with the flow of popular opinion one way or another. If you don't stand for something and you just continue to go with it, and once again, the ICE situation, I think, is a prime example where the base was so upset by seeing what happened under the Biden administration with the borders post-COVID, that overswing, that we're going to totally swing to the utmost extreme in order to please the base, as opposed to necessarily what is going to be a good solution to actually fix anything.
Right. Completely agree. I mean, I think I would say that, you know, I do think that there's a healthy place for populism. And I think when you have a majority of the population that feels a certain way about something, you should probably listen to them, because otherwise you're going to end up with some sort of revolt. And so to that end, I think it's important to pay attention to what the people are saying. But broadly speaking, I think we actually have a decent amount of agreement in this scenario.
All right, so we just got a couple minutes left here. So give a couple highlights of your recent episodes. You've actually had some key players running in Democrat races here that are going to be running for the primary here. Mansour, for example. You also spoke to Paige Boschman a few weeks ago. What are some highlights of some of that stuff?
Yeah, you know, I really enjoyed my conversation with Heath Howard. I think he's a really interesting candidate, and he's been rising in the polls lately. He just topped out Maura Sullivan in the latest poll that came out, so he's an up and comer and somebody to watch. Generally speaking, it's like when it comes to Paige, I think she's a really excellent challenger for somebody like Maggie Goodlander, who I don't enjoy her politics at all. I think a lot of it is very milquetoast and evokes this sense of wanting to live back in the 1990s, and it seems very detached from reality to me. I have zero interest in seeing another Shaheen show in office. I think that's just a very, very bad move.
If you got Lou D'Alessandro even calling it out, you got a real problem going on with the Nepo baby situation in the party right now.
Yeah. And that's just a symptom of the New Hampshire Democratic Party. That's just something that they love to do. And I am endlessly fascinated by the obsession with dynasty politics on both sides of the aisle in this state. I think it's a little silly. I think it does a very bad job of making anybody feel like there's any connection to their government. But at the same time, so many people are so checked out. And I think poll numbers really kind of reveal that people don't think about it that critically. They hear a name that they already know, and there's sort of backing and support behind that, and then it just falls right in the line. And I think both parties really rely on that sort of name recognition to push their candidates forward. So I'd really love to see a point where those sort of legendary names in the state are put in the back seat, and we actually get some folks that are really part of the actual population, that are on the ground dealing with real situations in the state, that understand what it's like to actually be engaged day to day, and don't have some sort of huge bank account that allows them to be insulated from the actual ongoings within the state of New Hampshire.
Carter, host of Locally Sourced, thank you for joining the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me, AJ. It was a good conversation.
So I'll put a link in the episode description to his channel, Locally Sourced. Please be sure to check that out. If you're listening on the radio, just go on the YouTubes. You'll find it there. It's good to hear a little bit of what's going on both sides of the aisle here, and that's a solid look at what's going on with some of the Democratic candidates and issues at hand over there. All right, NewEnglandTake.com to get more from the show. Once again, that is a Substack. Go over there, put in your email address. You'll get every episode as an email. You'll get the YouTube video here and the whole 9 yards. Be sure to like and subscribe if you're checking us out on YouTube. Thanks WKXL for picking up the show. Saturdays, 8:30 a.m. Next up is Facing the Future by the Conquer Coalition. And thank you to thegranitegrock.com for picking the show up. Talk to you soon.